My brother cheered when Mom slapped me in front of 55 people. Dad just leaned back, smirked, and said, "Serves you right." But what they didn't realize. That night, I called 3 numbers, and watched their world crumble. The night my mother slapped me so hard I saw stars, my brother actually clapped. My dad just smirked and said, "Serves you right." In that instant, I realized I wasn't the problem, I was just the mirror they all hated, and by morning, I'd shatter their world. But this story. It didn't start that night. It started years before, with whispered lies disguised as love, inheritance tangled in threads of betrayal, and a family that seemed to punish me for simply daring to survive. The real question isn't why they tried to break me. It's what happened when I finally refused to stay broken. It began with an envelope, sitting on my kitchen counter like a foreign object. Cream-colored, heavy paper, with gold-embossed lettering that practically screamed "Mies." My sister had always loved that kind of presentation, all about the aesthetics, never the substance. I just stared at it for a few seconds before I even reached for a letter opener. It had been 6 months, 6 months since anyone in my family had spoken to me. Not a call, not a text, not even one of those hollow, "hope you're well" messages. The last time I was in their house, Mies had screamed that I thought I was better than everyone, all because I wouldn't invest in her failing luxury fashion line. I walked out that night with the echo of slammed doors and harsh accusations ringing in my ears. And now this. Inside was an invitation to Thanksgiving dinner, handwritten in her perfect, flowing script. "Dear Solon, we hope you'll join us for a special Thanksgiving gathering. 3 p.m. family home. Love, Mies." Love, huh? I let out a soft, dry scoff. My hands weren't shaking because I was nervous. They were trembling from the sheer weight of everything that had built up in the silence between us. All the things left unsaid, the apologies never offered. I sank onto the edge of my worn kitchen chair, the letter still open in my lap, and tried to decide what felt worse, staying away, or walking back into that house. A part of me, the logical part, screamed that this had to be a trap. I wouldn't have been surprised if I walked in and found some passive-aggressive performance waiting for me. But then there was that other part, the part that used to curl into my mom's lap after bad dreams, the part that helped my dad tile the garage floor, the part that sewed Misa's prom dress in 3 nights when her seamstress bailed. That part wondered, what if this meant something? What if? My therapist once told me, closure doesn't always come wrapped in kindness. And that, for some reason, stuck with me. So that night, I booked a train ticket. The 9:05 a.m. Northeast Regional, arriving just after noon in New Jersey. I pulled out a vintage red dress from my closet. My mother always said it made me look cheap, like a political wife trying too hard. I wore it anyway, with my hair in a soft twist and a coat I hadn't touched since last winter. I felt like I was dressing for battle. The train ride felt endless. Maybe it was the heavy gray sky outside, or the woman across from me quietly sobbing into a Starbucks napkin. I didn't ask her why. We all carry our silent burdens, By the time I arrived, the neighborhood was just as manicured as ever. Lawns trimmed, identical cars in identical driveways. When I stepped up to that familiar white door, I noticed something that made my throat catch. The little wooden welcome sign above the porch. Mies had replaced it. It used to read, "The Blanchards, all are welcome." Now it read, "Family first always." The door swung open before I could even knock. A man in a white shirt and black vest stood there, holding a tablet. "Name, please?" he asked, his tone utterly neutral. "Solon," I said, my voice flat. He tapped something on the screen, then motioned me in. No hug. No warm hand squeeze like Mom used to give. Just protocol. As I walked inside, the scent of roasted turkey and rosemary drifted through the house. It was familiar, almost comforting, until I saw the seating chart taped to the side of the buffet cabinet. Mies, beside Logan, beside Mom, beside Dad, opposite guest, far left. Guest. No name. Just guest. I swallowed down the heat rising in my chest and handed my coat to another staffer. Not a family member. No one looked up. No one said, "Oh, Solon, you made it." The first face I recognized was Misa's. She walked toward me like a stage actress about to make a grand entrance, arms outstretched, lips stretched in that perfect, polished smile. "Oh, look who showed up," she announced, loud enough for the entire room to turn and look. There was laughter, light, tight, uncomfortable laughter. Dad gave a quick nod from his armchair but didn't move. He just sat there, legs crossed, glass in hand. Logan, my brother, walked right past me, said nothing, and grabbed a deviled egg off a tray. I made my way to the only empty chair, tucked behind the buffet table, farthest from the fireplace. I sat quietly, hands folded, and waited for the awkwardness to pass. It never did. Conversations swirled around me like I wasn't even there. Small talk, jokes about Logan's promotion, someone's kid getting into Cornell. Not a single word directed at me. Dinner was served just before 4. The turkey looked perfect. The stuffing smelled exactly like it did when I was 15, sneaking bites off the stovetop when Mom wasn't looking. Plates clinked, glasses lifted. Everyone seemed too rehearsed. As I reached for the cranberry sauce, I felt it before I saw it. Every eye subtly turning toward the head of the table. My mother stood, her chair creaking beneath her as she rose. She tapped her fork once against the rim of her wine glass. Clink. Twice. Clink. Clink. Then she looked at me. Not past me. Not near me. At me. Her eyes sharp, narrowed, like she was about to deliver a verdict. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just a toast. The sound of her fork tapping the glass still rang in my ears when she smiled that hostess smile, the kind that stretched but never softened. Everyone, my mother began, standing tall at the head of the table. Before we dive into dessert, I want to say a few words. The room hushed. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. 50-some people turned toward her, wine glasses in hand. I stayed silent, back straight, trying not to look as tense as I felt. I look around this room, she continued, sweeping her hand like a performer, and I see loyalty. I see tradition. And I see family who understands that respect must be earned, never assumed. My stomach tightened. Her voice carried across the dining room, lilting with warmth to the crowd, but razor-sharp to me. In every family, she said, there comes a time when we must remind ourselves who we are, where we come from, and more importantly, what we owe each other. She paused, letting her words settle. I could feel eyes grazing me, like heat from a stovetop. Because sometimes, she said softly, some daughters forget. A low, polite chuckle rumbled through the table. My wine glass remained untouched. I felt my palms go cold. They forget, she went on, that humility is a virtue. That success means nothing if you carry arrogance like perfume. That family is not an obligation, it's an honor. She didn't look at me directly anymore. She didn't need to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Money doesn't buy you roots, she said, a syrupy smile forming. And it certainly doesn't buy you love or respect. Another chuckle. Logan snorted, clearly enjoying himself. Because entitlement, she took a deep breath, savoring the finale. Entitlement is ugly, especially on family. That's when Logan clapped. 1, 2, 3 slow claps. His smirk carved across the room. That's Mom's best one yet, he muttered, just loud enough. Mies looked away, swirling her wine, pretending to focus on a cranberry garnish. Dad didn't move a muscle. I sat still, like a statue in red, trapped in a room that once held birthday parties and game nights and laughter. Now it was just a stage for my public shaming. I pushed back my chair gently and stood. I didn't say a word, just slid my napkin off my lap and laid it on the plate. I made it 2 steps before it happened. The sound cracked through the room, a hand against my face, hard, immediate. The left side of my cheek lit up like fire. It took me a second to realize she'd done it. My mother, her fingers still outstretched, her eyes wide, not with shock, but with satisfaction. Gasps erupted around the room, but no one moved. My wine glass slipped from my hand, hit the marble, and shattered. The sound echoed through the dead silence. Dad finally spoke from his seat, never looking up. Serves you right. I looked at him, looked at her, looked at the faces I used to know, now frozen, ashamed, some smug. Logan shifted in his chair, but didn't stand. Mies sipped her wine again, like this was all just background noise. And I didn't cry. I turned and walked out of the room. No rush. No dramatic pause. I just left through the hallway that used to smell like cinnamon. Past the family photos that stopped including me 5 years ago. Past the coat rack I built in high school shop class. Out the front door. The November air slapped against my cheek, now burning in more ways than one. But I didn't reach for it. I didn't need to. That sting reminded me this was real. I sat on the porch steps, just wood under my legs, and silence in the cold. No one followed me. Not a soul. Not one voice calling out, not even to pretend. That's when it hit me. Not like a knife, but like a slow truth, finally stepping into the light. I hadn't lost my family. I never had them. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my phone. My hand was steady. I scrolled down to the bottom. 3 names I'd never thought I'd use again. Each one burned like a match in the dark. I tapped the first one. It rang once, twice. Then came the voice, low, knowing. "I've been expecting your call." I didn't smile, just exhaled quietly and leaned back against my kitchen counter, the cool edge pressing into my spine. "Dorian," I said, my voice even. "It's time." A pause. Then, with that same calm cadence I always admired in him, he replied, "I take it the situation has escalated." "You could say that," I answered. "I need you to activate the contingency we discussed 2 years ago. The trust freeze. Full scope. And file the injunction. We block every channel they could move money through." I heard the sound of papers being shifted. He was already working. "You still have temporary POA over your mother, per the amendment we filed during her recovery. She never revoked it. She didn't know how," he said, almost amused. "And your father was too arrogant to check. You're still the legal gatekeeper." "Then file it," I said, closing my eyes. "And Dorian, make sure it hits by morning. Quietly. No media. No mess. You know me," he said smoothly. "I work in shadows." We ended the call there. No pleasantries. No goodbyes. Just mutual understanding. I set my phone on the counter and walked into my living room. My place was modest. 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, bookshelves that still smelled like old paperbacks. But it was mine. Every inch of it untouched by their hands. Outside, the streetlights cast soft golden halos on the quiet sidewalk. The kind of calm that came before a storm. I unlocked my laptop and dialed the second number. Miranda picked up before the second ring. "Solon," her voice was groggy. I checked the time. Past midnight. "I'm sorry for the hour. If you're calling, it's not small," she said, instantly alert. I clicked open the folder on my desktop labeled "For when they crossed the line." Then dragged in the phone photos I'd taken earlier that evening in my father's office. Ledgers. Handwritten checks. Sloppy cash logs scrolled in blue pen. "They've been siphoning donor funds through the foundation," I said, "into Misa's brand and Logan's train wreck startups." I could hear her sharp inhale. "I just sent you the photos. I want you to start forensic matching. Cross-check dates, deposits, vendor accounts. I want a full trail." Clicking. Typing. Silence. "Solon, if this checks out, it's criminal. We're not talking about a slap on the wrist." "I'm not looking for slaps," I replied. "I'm looking for truth." She didn't argue. "I'll start now. Expect a report by afternoon." I leaned back again, my shoulders finally touching the chair. I hadn't realized how long I'd been sitting upright, like I was still at that dinner table. The third call was the shortest. I stood, walked to the window, and dialed Ro. She picked up with a sigh. "This better be good." "It is." I gave her the foundation's EIN. No context. Just numbers. Then dropped the Dropbox link I'd preloaded months ago, containing backups, scans, flagged expenses, even security logs from my parents' office network. She didn't ask questions. Just said, "You'll get a subpoena confirmation within 48 hours. That was all. No goodnight. No thanks. I stayed at the window after the call. The glow of the city beyond Princeton was faint. Quiet. My own reflection stared back at me. Older than I remembered. Tired. But not broken. I made tea. It was almost muscle memory now. Chamomile. A drop of honey. The blue mug with a chipped handle I refused to replace. While the kettle hissed, my mind wandered back 2 years ago. The house still smelled like antiseptic and roses from the get-well bouquets. My mother had been in recovery after a rough abdominal surgery, and I had flown back from Boston to take care of her. My father had barely been home. Logan was in Vegas. Mies only stopped by for Instagram photos. So, it was me. Me, the daughter they forgot. The one changing her dressings, making bone broth, helping her in and out of bed. And while she slept, I had access. Passwords. Filing cabinets. Signature stamps. At the time, I didn't think I'd ever use it. I just archived it, like someone taping up emergency glass behind a wall, just in case. They never even noticed. Now, the kettle clicked off. I poured the tea, sat at the small table by the bookshelf, and watched the steam curl upward like a dancer with no audience. I didn't feel rage. Not anymore. That was the old me. Rage was loud. Rage was messy. This was something else. They wanted a scapegoat, someone to humiliate, someone to point at and say, see? This is what happens when you step out of line. They wanted the silent daughter to stay silent. Well, I would be. But now, silence would be my weapon. I took one last sip, closed the laptop, and whispered to the empty room, now we wait. 72 hours later, their world began to crumble. The family's accounts were frozen, and the calls started pouring in. I was in my kitchen stirring a small pot of oatmeal when the first one came in. The screen lit up with, Dad, in bold letters. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. There's a problem with the trust, he said, skipping even a hello. The quarterly transfer didn't go through. I called the bank. They said it's been flagged. Can you check? His voice wasn't panicked yet, just impatient, like a man accustomed to things working exactly the way he expects. I didn't answer right away. I spooned the oatmeal into a bowl, added a pinch of cinnamon, and walked to the table before replying. No. There was a beat of silence. What do you mean, no? I mean, I said calmly, I'm not going to check. You'll have to figure it out another way. You have power of attorney, and I'm using it. I hung up. The second call came before I'd even taken a bite. Logan. Voicemail. Then another. And another. By the fourth one, my phone buzzed so hard it rattled against the wooden tabletop. I didn't listen right away. I finished eating first. Then, I poured myself some coffee, sat back, and finally pressed play. You think you're clever? He growled, his voice half-choked with rage. You think cutting off the money makes you powerful? We made you, Solon. We fed you. We gave you everything. Next message. This is what you wanted, isn't it? You always wanted to destroy us. Well, now you have. Are you proud? Then silence for maybe 2 hours. I spent that time reviewing some invoices Miranda had flagged. Dates that aligned a little too neatly with Misa's sponsorship fund. It was always labeled under event outreach. Right. Outreach to the florist, the venue, and a champagne tasting in Montauk. At 11:23 a.m., Mise called. The ringtone barely rang once before I hit mute. I watched her name fade into missed call. Then a voicemail. She sounded breathless. Not the spoiled defiance I was used to. This was full-blown panic. They said the payment didn't go through. The venue called me, Solon. Me. Not Dad. Not Mom. Me. You knew how important this was. You knew how long I've planned this. In the background, I could hear a man's voice shouting something. Probably Chase, her fiancé. He didn't sound thrilled. I waited. She kept going. Do you even care what this does to me? Or are you just cruel? I didn't respond. I just typed one line into our old family group chat. The trust was never yours to spend. Send. No reply. By early afternoon, Miranda texted, confirmed. The venue, florist, catering deposits. All from the foundation's secondary account. Frozen. Not long after, Ro chimed in, vendors are backing out. Word spreading. One of them posted in the Hudson Valley Wedding Planner forum. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the small watercolor above my desk. A girl walking into a forest. No path, just snow and space and silence. There was a kind of satisfaction settling over me. Not revenge, just clarity. Then came the call. Mom. Her name flashed on screen like a thunderclap. I stood up, poured water into the kettle just to keep my hands busy, and answered. Her voice was cold. Controlled. You humiliated me. I didn't flinch. No, I said softly. You did that all by yourself. You ruined your sister's wedding. No, I repeated. You allowed her to steal from a charitable trust. And now the system did what it's meant to do. I didn't hack anything. I didn't break laws. I just let truth catch up. She went quiet. But not because she understood. You were always difficult, Solon. So correct. So obsessed with doing things the hard way. You just don't understand family. Maybe not your kind, I replied. I ended the call. This time, I didn't even feel my heart race. The day slipped toward evening. I worked quietly. Folded laundry. Lit a small vanilla candle. Outside, the first snowflakes began falling, soft, slow, like someone above had taken pity and was tucking the world under a blanket. I stood by the window, mug in hand, and watched. For a second, I saw myself, 12 years old, sitting in the backseat of Dad's car while Mies tried on pageant dresses. Logan had made fun of my shoes. I had bought them with my own allowance. You could try being less weird, he had said. Dad didn't even glance up from his phone. And I laughed like it was funny. Like if I agreed with them just enough, I'd belong. That girl was gone. This woman didn't need their approval. She didn't need an invitation to a wedding paid for with stolen funds. My thoughts were interrupted by another call. No name. No number. Blocked. I let it ring twice, then answered. A quiet breath on the other side. Then a familiar voice said, Solon, I have something you need to hear about your father. I recognized the voice before she said her name. Solon, it's Marcia. I worked with your Aunt Cecile back then. My hand tightened around the phone. I hadn't heard that name in years. Aunt Cecile had died under what they'd called natural causes a decade ago. The only one who ever stood up to my father, and quietly vanished from every family photo and conversation after her funeral. I kept something, Marcia said. She asked me to. I think it's time you heard it. She didn't give more over the phone. Only told me to meet her at the Newark County Records Building, 4th floor, back archive room at 4:30 sharp. I left the house without finishing my tea. The drive was gray. Wet roads. Moody clouds. Just enough drizzle to make the world feel quiet and suspicious. The kind of weather that makes your windshield wipers squeak like a lie being scrubbed clean. The records building was nearly empty that time of day. The 4th floor smelled like old paper and ghosted bureaucracy. I found the archive room door slightly ajar, and there she was. Marcia looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, her gray hair pulled into a tight knot. Her eyes flicked up and softened. You came, she said, almost surprised. You sounded serious. She nodded and walked to a filing cabinet, opened a hidden panel behind it, and pulled out a small manila envelope. This was Cecile's insurance, she whispered. In case something ever happened to her, or in case they tried to erase her. Inside was a thumb drive. Plain. No label. No markings. She pressed it into my hand like it was burning. Keep it off Wi-Fi. Trust me. I stared at her. What's on it? Marcia didn't answer right away. Then she said, proof of who your father really was. By the time I got home, it was nearly 7. I turned off my phone, closed the blinds, and sat down at the kitchen counter with my old laptop. No internet. No Bluetooth. Just the bare machine and the drive. I hesitated before plugging it in. The file was labeled 2011419 Cecile Audio. I hit play. At first, just static, then footsteps. A woman's voice. Cecile's, muttering something about the recorder, and then my father's voice. So, here's the plan. We call it a family trust. Make it look clean. The girls' names go on the docs. That'll keep it above board. Another voice. My mother's, smooth, calculated. And the IRS, they'll be sniffing soon. You saw the audit timeline. Dad, again. We push the real assets through the construction shell, then tuck the money under the new trust. Only Logan gets the codes. We don't need the girls digging. A pause, then a chuckle. Solon won't even notice. She's too busy being noble. She won't ask questions. I stopped the playback. My breath caught like I'd swallowed glass. They hadn't just excluded me. They'd used me. My name. My identity. My silence. I wasn't the overlooked daughter. I was the decoy. I let the file play again. This time, all the way through. They spoke about forged documents, moving funds in chunks just under reportable limits, creating dummy invoices. My mother said something about a retirement home in Geneva. My father laughed, said he'd bury the paperwork in plain sight. I sat there long after the file ended, staring at nothing. All these years I thought I was just invisible. But no. Visibility was never the issue. They saw me clearly. Saw exactly what they could get away with using me for. Eventually, I pulled out my folder with copies of the trust. The signatures. My name was there twice. Except I'd never signed. I checked the notary stamp, dated 2011, an old name I didn't recognize. I called Dorian, my lawyer, and told him everything. He whistled low. Forgery. Misappropriation of funds. Wire fraud. This is enough to open a criminal investigation. And the notary? Retired in Florida. But if we can show a pattern. I want this exposed, I said. He didn't try to slow me down. Just said, I'll get the paperwork started. After the call, I sat back and tried to breathe. The room was dark, except for the small light above the stove. I found myself staring at the bookshelf across the room. One of the spines caught my eye. A photo album. My 12th birthday. We were in the old house then, the one with the attic no one wanted to clean. That's where Cecile used to hide her journals. I remembered climbing up there once, trying to find a present she'd hidden. That's when I heard Dad yell. Not at me, but at Cecile. You cross me again, and I'll make sure you regret ever being part of this family. And Cecile? She didn't cry. She didn't yell back. She just said, Solon's going to see it all one day. And when she does, don't expect mercy. I hadn't understood it then, but I did now. Later that night, I dug deeper into the paperwork. Cross-referenced dates. Noticed a sudden change in the trust's language after 2011. Everything pointed to concealment. A wall of financial fog. But the line that kept echoing, only Logan gets the codes. They'd locked me out from the start. And worse, they counted on me not fighting back. It wasn't just betrayal. It was strategy. A few minutes before midnight, I forwarded the audio file to 3 people. Dorian. An IRS contact I knew from a nonprofit audit last year. And Mies. She'd been screaming about her wedding collapsing. She wanted to know why. Now she'd know. 5 minutes later, a text blinked onto my screen from Mies. Just 3 words. What the hell? I hadn't even set the laptop down when the doorbell rang. Not a light, polite press. It was fast. Impatient. A jarring sound against the quiet thrum of my thoughts. I walked to the door, still gripping the edge of the kitchen counter, my fingertips cold. Through the peephole, I saw her. Mies. Still in that stiff navy blazer she'd worn at the last board meeting. Hair up, but frayed. Mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes. Her knuckles white from clenching her phone. I opened the door without a word. She didn't wait to be asked in, just stepped across the threshold and held out her phone. Was that real? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. I only nodded. Mies dropped her arm slowly, like it had been holding something heavier than it looked. She leaned back against the wall near the coat rack, her breath shaky. They told me you left because you were selfish, she whispered. Said you didn't want to be part of the family, that you thought you were better than us. I closed the door behind her. No, I said quietly. I left because I knew something was wrong. I just didn't have proof until now. She didn't speak, just stood there, eyes darting around my small kitchen like she couldn't quite believe where she was. Like she'd stepped into a world she'd always avoided. I didn't know, she said finally, her voice cracking. I mean, I knew things didn't add up, but I thought I was imagining it. I motioned toward the dining table. She sat stiffly, like the chair might collapse under the weight of the past. We sat in silence for a few moments, her elbows resting on the table, palms over her face. They always told me, she began, not looking up. That you were different. Mom told me when I was 14, Solon isn't like us. She's adopted in spirit. Don't ever trust her with real things. I didn't even know what that meant then. My heart clenched, but I kept my face still. That's why you stopped telling me anything. She looked up, her face flushed. I thought I was protecting the family. They made it sound like you were dangerous, disloyal. And when you left, they said you'd taken money, that you were angry because you weren't named in the first trust. I let out a soft laugh, tired, bitter. I didn't even know there was a trust until last year. Mies looked like she'd been slapped. She rubbed her forehead hard, like she could scrub the memory away. I thought I was the favorite. But now I don't think they ever loved me. Not really. I was just useful. She paused, then said, I thought I was the face of the family. Turns out I was the mask they wore to keep their secrets. I watched her unravel, and for a moment, I didn't feel angry. I just felt sad. For both of us. You still have a choice, I said quietly. You can keep pretending none of this happened. I paused. Or you can help me bring it all to light. Mies looked at me, eyes glassy. How? I need you to sign an affidavit that you heard them talk about the trust, especially what Dad said, that you knew the version I received wasn't what was signed. We'll file it with the investigation. Mies hesitated. That would make me part of it. I'd be exposed. I nodded. But you'll also be free. She looked down at her phone. Her fingers hovered over it for a moment, then slowly set it face down on the table. I'm done protecting monsters, she said. Whatever you need, I'll sign it. I exhaled slowly. My shoulders had been tensed so long I hadn't even realized it. We didn't say anything else for a while. Just sat there like two women waking from the same bad dream. Eventually, I got up to pour us both a glass of water. When I sat back down, she was staring off toward the bookshelf. I followed her gaze. You remember the attic? She asked. I blinked. At the Tenafly house. Yeah. When we were kids, you had that stuffed fox. What did you name it? Marble, she said. Marble the fox. He was missing one eye. She smiled faintly. You used to bring him up there with snacks, and I'd sneak in with a flashlight. We made a whole secret sister club. You remember? I do, I said. You made me promise you'd never marry anyone unless he passed our code test. She laughed, but it cracked halfway through. And I promised I'd always have your back. She looked down again. I guess I broke that. I didn't say anything. I just reached across the table and rested my hand near hers. She didn't pull away. The moment passed, quiet and fragile. Then her phone buzzed, vibrating against the wood. She picked it up and froze. What is it? I asked. She looked up slowly. You might want to sit down. I didn't move. Dad just filed an emergency motion in court, she said. He's trying to block access to the trust. Says you're a security threat to the estate. I stood up. Not fast. Not dramatic. But deliberate. My mind didn't race, but my hands. They curled into fists. Not in fear. In readiness. It was time for the hearing. We arrived at the courthouse just before noon. A quiet drizzle had started. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make the sidewalks gleam and the world feel slightly colder than it was. I stepped out of the car, briefcase in hand, and followed my attorney through the side entrance, reserved for scheduled hearings. No reporters. Not yet. The marble floors of Bergen County Courthouse were polished to a near-mirror shine. The halls echoed faintly with footsteps and the muted murmur of legal staff moving between rooms. Inside courtroom B, the temperature felt artificially cool, like the air had been stripped of any warmth. Fitting, considering who was sitting across from me. My father wore a charcoal gray suit, darker than usual, with a red tie so perfectly knotted it looked like a warning. My mother sat beside him in cream and pearls, stiff-backed and unmoving. She didn't look at me. Logan sat on the other side, arms folded, jaw clenched like it was wired shut. Their lawyer, a man named Carlton Merritt, adjusted his silver cufflinks and gave me a long, polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. We took our seats. The judge, a stern woman in her early 60s named Justice Wilford, entered, her robes brushing the polished floor. This is an emergency motion filed by Mr. Alan Devo to reverse the court-ordered freeze on the Devo Family Trust, she said, her voice clipped and clear. All parties present. Carlton stood. Yes, Your Honor, and with your permission, I'd like to begin. Proceed. He adjusted his tie and stepped forward, hands folded at his waist. Your Honor, the court has been led astray by a series of emotionally charged claims made by Mrs. Solon Devo, who, while intelligent, has a documented history of emotional instability stemming from a traumatic adolescence. This recent action, freezing the family's trust, was not only impulsive, but retaliatory. She's acting from a place of vengeance, not justice. I felt my attorney, Mrs. Bristow, shift beside me, calmly, unshaken. Carlton continued, the trust, Your Honor, has provided for multiple generations of DeVos. To paralyze it based on a single heir's accusations without full evidence or due process risks severe financial harm. We request the immediate lifting of the freeze and reinstatement of Mr. Devo as sole trustee. He stepped back, smug and composed. Justice Wilford turned to us. Mrs. Bristow, your response. She stood. Yes, Your Honor. Miss Devo would like to speak directly to the court. The judge nodded. I rose slowly, aware of the silence, the way even the court reporter paused just slightly as I took the stand. My heels clicked softly on the tile. A steady rhythm. I was sworn in, sat down, and looked directly at the judge. When I froze the trust, it wasn't because I was angry, I said. It was because I finally had proof. I paused, let the words settle. For years, I questioned why documents didn't match. Why my name was left off key financial decisions despite promises. Why my father's signatures kept appearing, and mine did too, even when I'd never signed anything. I suspected fraud, but I didn't act, because suspicion isn't proof. I looked at Carlton, then at my father. Now I have more than suspicion. Mrs. Bristow walked to the front and handed a thick file to the clerk. Your Honor, she said, we're submitting 2 key pieces of evidence. First, a set of trust documents bearing Mrs. Devoe's forged signature, compared to notarized samples from prior filings. Second, an audio file. In this recording, Mr. Devoe is heard explicitly discussing financial misrepresentation, including concealing funds under his daughter's names to bypass IRS scrutiny. Judge Wilford raised an eyebrow. You have the audio? We do. It was obtained legally through a wiretapped phone call with a witness who has since submitted an affidavit. Justice Wilford leaned slightly forward. Play it. The courtroom went still. A tech assistant rolled in a small speaker and pressed play. There it was. My father's voice, clear and unhurried. We'll move the rest under me's name. She doesn't ask questions. Solon's too nosy. We'll tell her she's not part of the succession. Make it about her attitude. Keep her out. If the IRS looks, we're clean on paper. Logan's voice chimed in faintly, laughing. You're ruthless. And then my father again, chuckling. No, I'm careful. No one breathed. The courtroom held its breath like a single body. Even Carlton's fake composure cracked. He blinked, his jaw shifting tight. My mother stared at the floor. Logan leaned back, pale. The judge looked straight at my father. Mr. Devoe. Is that your voice? My father hesitated. That could have been. Yes or no? Yes. But she cut him off. That's sufficient. The room remained silent except for the sound of the judge scribbling a note. Justice Wilford turned to the clerk. Motion denied. The freeze on the Devoe Family Trust remains in full effect. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter for immediate review by federal authorities under suspicion of financial fraud and perjury. Mr. Devoe, Miss Devoe, and Mr. Logan Devoe are to provide full disclosure within 7 business days. Carlton tried to stand, but the judge raised her hand. This isn't a negotiation. Court adjourned. The gavel struck like a gunshot. I stood, gathering my coat, keeping my movement steady. Behind me, I heard my father rise. Abrupt. Angry. I was halfway to the hallway when his voice came, sharp and low behind me. You think you've won? I stopped, turned, looked him straight in the eye. No, I said. I think I've begun. He said nothing. His mouth opened, then shut. His fists clenched at his sides. But there was nothing left to say. Not in that room. Not today. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds hadn't cleared yet. But there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. The kind that comes just before the storm breaks for good. I didn't say another word. I just walked. The first knock came 2 days later, at exactly 7:36 in the morning. The sun had barely lifted above the line of trees in Tenafly. The sky a dull gray, like it hadn't decided if the day deserved light or not. From inside the Devoe estate, it must have seemed like just another Thursday. Calm. Silent. Insulated from the consequences that had been knocking long before this morning. Then came the second knock, firmer. And then the doorbell, held down long enough to signal this wasn't some neighbor returning a misdelivered package. Logan was the first to reach the front door. He opened it to a cluster of people in navy windbreakers, crisp and impersonal. IRS Federal Enforcement Division, one of them said, holding up a badge before Logan could say a word. We have a warrant. Behind them, a line of agents stepped forward in quiet coordination. Some with rolling cases, others with clear plastic bins. One carried a handheld scanner. Another had gloves already on. They moved like they'd done this before, because they had. I wasn't there, of course. I was in Princeton, standing in my kitchen, reheating yesterday's coffee and staring out at the backyard fence when my phone buzzed. It was Dorian. No text, just a photo. A close-up shot of cardboard evidence boxes being wheeled down the front steps of the Devoe house, each labeled with printed tags, Trust 14C, Holdings 1996 to 2020, Devoe/Logan Digital Archives. I didn't smile. I just whispered, you opened this door. I just held the mirror. Back in Tenafly, panic had already broken loose inside. Logan's wife let out a sharp scream when agents entered the hallway and headed toward the study. I was told she stood frozen for a second, then burst into loud sobs before locking herself in the downstairs guest room. Their mother, pale and shaking in her silk robe, collapsed onto the living room sofa and let out a faint cry for smelling salts, like she was performing for an invisible audience. One of the agents offered her a glass of water. She didn't take it. And my father? He marched down the stairs, still half-dressed, and demanded loudly and with the false confidence of a man too used to being obeyed, that everyone stop this nonsense and get the family attorney on the line immediately. The lead agent, a middle-aged woman with iron-straight posture, handed him the warrant calmly. "This is a federal investigation, sir. You can contact counsel, but the search proceeds." He didn't like that. Apparently, he stood there for a good 20 seconds, lips pressed so tight they disappeared. Then he stepped aside, muttering something about witch hunts and media vultures. In Logan's office, things turned quiet and surgical. Cabinets were opened. USB drives labeled "consulting" were bagged. His laptop was imaged and returned. Paperwork was photographed and logged before being boxed. Then one of the younger agents, while sifting through a heavy wooden filing cabinet, tapped something metallic at the back panel. It sounded hollow. He paused, slid the entire row of files aside, and there it was. A small compartment built into the back wall of the cabinet. Inside, tucked neatly beside an old cigar case, was a black leather notebook, soft, worn, like it had been handled often. No title. Just a wraparound strap. They unbound it carefully. Every page was handwritten. Dates. Amounts. Routing numbers. Abbreviations. And something else. Names. Not full ones, just codes. But they were unmistakable. M01. S91. L73. Birth months and years. Family birth dates. Mine. Misa's. Logan's. Transfers to offshore accounts. Movements between dummy trusts. It wasn't clever. It was arrogant. When the agent showed it to Logan, he tried to laugh. "That's just notes for tax planning," he said. "Everyone keeps notes." The agent didn't blink. "Then you can explain it to the prosecutor." Hours later, the house had been swept clean of its secrets. The agents left with 12 boxes, 2 hard drives, and 1 black notebook that now sat at the center of a growing case. I learned all this in pieces, texts. Calls, whispers from former staff who still had loyalties that didn't belong to my parents. But what stayed with me most wasn't the files or the screaming or even the knock. It was Mies. She didn't call. She just showed up. Around 6:40 that evening, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, she was standing there in jeans and a navy sweater, holding a ceramic casserole dish in her hands. The kind you bake for someone when there's been a death or a confession. She looked tired. But there was something else, too. A resignation that I hadn't seen on her face in years. "I made lasagna," she said quietly. "It was your favorite back then." I stepped aside. "Come in." We ate at the kitchen table in near silence. No music. No TV. Just the clink of forks and the hum of the refrigerator. At one point, I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out an old photo, creased and slightly faded. It was from one of our sleepovers as kids, back when she still wore glasses too big for her face, and we built blanket forts in the living room. I placed it between us on the table. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "Do you think she ever loved either of us?" I didn't have an answer. But she looked at me again, this time with tears forming. I asked her that today. I leaned back, listening. She slapped me. Mies said, her voice flat. Just like she used to. "And you?" I didn't move. I just turned around and left. We finished the lasagna. No leftovers. She stayed until almost 9. Then she stood, hugged me, and left without asking for anything. That night, just before I went to bed, I checked the mailbox. It was late, past 10, but something told me to go. Inside was a single envelope, certified, cream-colored. No return address printed. But in the corner, handwritten in a shaky but familiar script, were 5 words. "To the rightful heir, BD." I stared at it for a moment, heartbeat slow but steady. Then I closed the door, turned off the porch light, and held it against my chest. Whatever came next wasn't theirs to steal anymore. I didn't even make it to the kitchen. I stood in the hallway, the envelope trembling in my hands. When I slid my finger under the seal, I expected bank statements, maybe legal threats. But instead, what fell out first was something smaller, thicker than a page, a USB drive. I froze. Then I turned the envelope upside down, and a folded letter slipped out. Handwritten in my grandfather's unmistakable script. Those slow, looping strokes that used to sign my report cards with a smiley face. It smelled faintly of pipe smoke and cedar, like the cabin he always loved more than people. The first words stopped me cold. If you're reading this, Solon, then you've already proven stronger than I ever was. I sank onto the armrest of the couch without thinking, the letter shaking slightly as I held it close enough to read every word. He wrote of regrets. How he'd watched year after year the way my parents clipped my wings while telling me they were sheltering me. How they pitted us against each other, Logan, me, as if our worth was a finite resource. How he'd wanted to intervene but feared tearing the family apart, like silence was a form of protection. But then came the truth. He'd never intended for my parents to control his estate. He'd seen them manipulate wills, pressure trustees, spin stories to suit themselves. So he created a separate provision, one that bypassed all of them entirely. You'll find it enclosed in the files my lawyer was instructed to deliver only upon clear evidence of wrongdoing. His script became shakier near the end. I may be gone when you read this, but know this, everything I built in Vermont, all of it, is yours. Not because of blood, but because you saw people clearly and still chose to be kind. Because you didn't need power to act with strength. He ended with a line I hadn't read in decades, something he used to whisper when tucking me into the cabin's bunk beds during summer storms. Build something that lasts longer than anger. I set the letter down and stared at the flash drive. My fingers hesitated over the laptop, but I clicked it in. The screen stayed black for a second. Then he appeared. My grandfather. In a worn wool cardigan, seated in front of the Vermont fireplace. A small clock behind him read 2016. He looked right into the lens, as if he knew I'd be on the other side one day. If you're watching this, kiddo, he said, his voice lower than I remembered. Then they've done what I feared they would. I didn't blink. I'm sorry I didn't stop it sooner. But you stood up. You made them show who they were. And that takes more guts than I ever had. He coughed once, leaned forward slightly. I saw what they did to you. How they cut you out. Made you small. Blamed you when they were afraid of what you might grow into. But I knew better. I always did. So, I left instructions. Real ones. They'll try to fight it, but the letter and this recording are legally notarized. The Vermont Trust, the land, the cabin, it's yours. Always was. He leaned back, sighing. Build something with your name on it. Something that doesn't erase who you are. Don't spend your life proving them wrong. Just live like you were right all along. The screen faded to black. I didn't cry. I just sat there for a long while, heart full, but still. By morning, I called my attorney. We filed the letter and the video into the court proceedings. Within 3 weeks, the judge ruled in our favor. The main trust my parents had tried to use. Declared fraudulent. My grandfather's instructions were recognized as binding, irrevocable. My phone lit up with news alerts later that day. Devo Family Trust invalidated in court. Local financier faces IRS scrutiny over alleged estate fraud. There was a photo of my father shielding his face from a camera, and another of Logan outside what used to be his firm, now shuttered. Me's wasn't in any of them. I didn't post a statement. Didn't tweet. Didn't give a quote to the one journalist who somehow got my number. Because silence, when it comes from the one they dismissed, echoes louder than rage. 3 weeks later, I drove up to Vermont. The road curved in familiar rhythms. The trees dense and rustling, like they remembered me. When I reached the cabin, the key still fit, like no time had passed. Inside, everything was just as he left it. Woodpile stacked. Flannel blankets folded. His favorite mug resting on the windowsill. I lit the fireplace, took out the letter, and placed it above the mantel under a small brass lantern that used to guide us home on foggy nights. It flickered gently, casting soft light across the stone hearth. This was mine now. Not in the way of ownership, but in the way of roots. Weeks passed. I registered the Vermont Trust in my name. Converted a portion into a foundation, a quiet one, named in his honor. It offered financial literacy workshops, legal navigation tools, and small grants for young women with complicated family histories. Women like me. Mies joined without being asked. She didn't want her name on anything. Said she'd just make spreadsheets and stir the soup at meetings. But every time I looked at the attendance rosters or donation logs, I saw her notes in the margins. Gentle. Thoughtful. Never looking for credit. We never talked about the slap or the lasagna. Just moved forward, like you do when healing has no dramatic music, just small, steady days that don't hurt. Now and then, someone from Tenafly would email. A distant cousin. An old teacher. A housekeeper who remembered when I used to leave thank you notes in the laundry room. I responded kindly, but never went back. And now, when people ask how I managed to survive all that, I tell them this: sometimes you won't get the apology. You won't hear the words you deserved. Sometimes they won't even admit what they did. But if you live in truth, whether it's loud or quiet or whispered through court papers, your peace will grow louder than their cruelty ever was. So no, I didn't break the family. I simply stopped letting it break me.